Welcome everybody to this webinar covering off the 4.0 impact measures that you can immediately do to reduce your SAP TCO, total cost of ownership. So essentially what we're going to cover off today is that, and we've got three organisations talking today, Grey Monarch, Blackdog and Proceed. We're going to cover off all our expertise today. Obviously, it's what we're going to cover off today is obviously it's running SAP landscapes are one of the most expensive parts of any or most organisations' infrastructure and software landscape. So we're going to cover off a number of areas. So archiving and data management, SAP licensing, infrastructure, and obviously the support costs behind the infrastructure and the software. So we're going to go through on how we can reduce in specifically four areas, essentially without significantly impacting your BAU or business as usual activities. So let's have a look at the agenda. So introductions. So we're just going to touch on the three organisations on the call. We've got myself from Proceed, we've got David Lloyd from Grey Monarch, Rob Ashby and John Walsh from Blackdog Technologies, and they'll introduce themselves in a moment. Then we're looking at basically the process that we feel provides the information you require to make these judgments on regards to reducing your total cost of ownership. So John will give us some background on that. We'll then dive into SAP license usage with David from Grey Monarch. And then I'll jump in and talk about data management, right-sizing and decommissioning. And then we'll hand back over to Rob Ashby, who will talk about Blackdog Technologies and how we can improve infrastructure and architecture strategy. And then we'll go into some Q&A and close the webinar. During the webinar, we're going to have a few questions, so we can try and make this a bit more interactive, try and get some feedback from yourselves, some polls as we go through. So get ready with your polling, and let's hope you enjoy the webinar. Okay. First question. When did you last review your SAP systems with cost optimization as the primary focus? So when was that last time you did that? So quick poll. We won't give you too long to reply, but if you could select one of them and we can. Okay, Rebecca, have you got some feedback at all?
Yep, so it's 100% on in the last 2 to 5 years.
Okay, great, good, excellent. Okay, so moving on. So just a quick introduction on the Proceed group. So we're widely recognised as SAP experts, specifically in archiving, decommissioning, and content management of enterprise systems, specifically in the SAP area. We've been doing it for about 20 years, which ironically is about how long SAP archiving has been available. And we've got about 650 plus customers worldwide that we've within those last 20 years that we've been engaging with different types of projects to improve their data management. We've got headquarters in the UK, but we've got offices in the US, Belgium, Germany, South Africa, and India, and we're expanding it at the moment. We've got into the Nordics, and we're looking at Asia Pac at the moment as well. We have some strong partnerships, including SAP, obviously, which we'll touch on in a moment in a bit more detail. Blackdog Technologies, obviously on the call, Easy Software, Grey Monarch, obviously, and then we also touch on the hyperscalers and the likes of Virtustream, Google, Amazon, and we also do a lot of work with T-Systems. We're a gold partner with SAP. We have a global master service agreement with SAP, and we do a lot of pre-sales work with SAP to help them deliver data management projects to their customers. And so far, we've taken about 100 plus customers from a current ECC system into SAP HANA within the right sizing, which again we'll touch on later. and we've saved a significant amount of money on that journey for those organisations. Little bit of a scattering of those 650 customers. Some of them you recognise, some of you may not recognise. We've worked with a number of organisations worldwide, but just to give you a flavour. So that's the Proceed group. I'll now hand over to, then on to the next slide, hand over to Grey Monarch, and David, please introduce Grey Monarch.
Great, thank you very much, Graham. Good afternoon, everybody. My name's David Lloyd. I'm a director at Grey Monarch. We're also a well-known SAP partner with specialist expertise in SAP behavioural and usage analytics, especially around areas of enhancing security using those analytics and user behaviour to understand more about threats to SAP systems. But we can also use that kind of information to optimize SAP licenses, which is more of the area that we're going to focus in on today. We've been around just over 13 years now with about 70 plus UK customers. Very similar to Proceed in that respect, all different shapes and sizes, different sectors, as you can see from our a selection of some of our customers you can see on the screen. So our main areas of expertise is, of course, license optimization, but security cleansing, active threat detection of SAP systems and fraud detection, vulnerability scanning and remediation, so more low-level kind of scanning to look at vulnerabilities within your core SAP systems and automatically remediating them. Dynamic data masking and access controls is I think a fairly up and coming area of SAP security, which I'm finding quite fascinating actually, allowing you to dynamically mask bits of data in SAP systems as people are using them. So even if an account has got SAP All and can do pretty much anything in SAP, you can still on screen mask any data you like personal data, sensitive data for GDPR purposes. So and also control people's access based on their environment. You know, are they working from home? Are they working from a work device or a home device or private device like a phone? So a really fascinating area. And also employee lifecycle automation. So automating joiner, mover, leaver processes. That's a very quick introduction from us. I'll be back a little bit later to talk more specifically around SAP license optimization.
Hi, good morning. Thank you, David. So yeah, my name's John Walsh. I'm one of the co-founders of Blackdog Technologies. I'd like to talk a little bit today about why Blackdog was founded. I'm also going to touch on some of the reasons and the parameters behind why we created this analysis and optimization service that we are specifically here to talk about today. And then I'll hand back to David, I think, who's going to go into a bit more detail on Grey Monarch services. So Blackdog was founded in 2019. Rob Ashby and myself are the two co-founders of the organization. We both worked in the IT industry for around about 25 years. For the last 10 years or so, at that time, particularly for myself, I was working predominantly in the area of SAP. Worked for IBM, worked for Dell VirtuStream, generally helping clients to either do greenfield SAP implementations or take in existing SAP systems and moving them from one hosted environment to another, and particularly for the last 5 years or so, helping them to move to the cloud. So one of the things I often noticed with organizations that were moving SAP into the cloud particularly is that we often seen that organizations would make a decision based on a single key trigger event. So for example, a contract might be coming to an end. You might have some aging infrastructure that's causing application problems. There might be a cloud first strategy in the organization, which is kind of prompting that organization to try to move as much as possible into the cloud. And then what we often saw was that having that single reason or that single kind of critical event that prompted the move to the cloud We've seen some quite spectacular failures in that time, because often there was a knock-on effect where people had not generally considered all of the other parameters that are required prior to moving the SAP system to the cloud. So, for example, we've seen people moving highly customized SAP systems into hyperscale cloud environments, which caused both difficulty with the infrastructure, a bit of infrastructure sprawl, expanding costs and costs going out of control. Similarly, people moving very large databases into the cloud, which again can cause some significant cost implications. So with all of these things in mind, Rob and I decided to create Blackdog, and the reason behind that was really to help clients to better understand a lot of those parameters within the system prior to making these decisions. So, you know, if you do decide to move to the cloud or you decide to move to a different type of infrastructure, that you're doing that from a position of strength and a position of knowledge. And, you know, also we decided to keep ourselves independent. So whilst we work with the hyperscalers, we work with some key vendors like Virtustream and Embis, who are on the call today. We want to keep Blackdog as an independent voice so that we can work with clients independently to give them the best possible advice. And what I'll do now is go on to talk about the partnership that we've got with Grey, Monarch and Proceed. So just want to skip to the next slide, please, Rob. So in this slide, what we're doing is we're taking a look at what's behind the analysis and optimization service that we're talking about today, along with some of the questions which it can help you to answer. As I mentioned in the previous slide, we work closely with Grey, Monarch and Proceed to create this offering, which basically gives you a deep dive in your SAP systems to analyze data management and archiving, the licensing position, and the underlying infrastructure, basically to give you information, key information about those critical parameters that help to have a big influence on your SAP system. And we designed this process very much to make it repeatable, but also to make it customizable to individual requirements. So for each engagement that we do with individual clients, we follow the same process, but we try as much as possible to make it personalized to you as an organization. So for the information gathering process, you know, we put agents out on your systems to gather information. We gather that information around licensing. We gather the information around data management and archiving, and we also look at the underlying infrastructure. In parallel to this, we conduct either a series of workshops or a single workshop, depending on what the requirement looks like. But those workshops are very much designed for us to understand your strategy as an organization, both from a business perspective. So, you know, what's the business strategy look like over the next 3 to 5 years, but as well as what does the SAP strategy look like? So, you know, where do you see SAP going in that sort of short, medium and long term? And the reason for that is because what we try to do is, as much as possible, is link the work that we're doing during this analysis and optimization process to your strategy, as I say, as a business, but both as a strategy for the business and a strategy for SAP going forward. Once we've gathered all of the data and we've covered the requirements, we then put this into a report, and we document the report and all of our findings into a single report. We'll present that report back to you, both verbally, so in the form of a presentation, where again we'll get all of the key stakeholders together. We'll present the findings in the report back to you, but we'll also deliver a written document, which is then yours to do with as you please going forward. Obviously, the report generally has a series of recommendations in there. Those recommendations can lead to projects. So, you know, we're here to help you with those projects going forward. If at that point, you know, it's completely up to you, you can disengage from the process at that point and take the report off and work on those projects yourself going forward. So next slide, please, Rob. So in this slide, it talks a little bit about what we analyse and why we do it. I won't go into too much detail on each of them because the guys are all going to cover these in quite a bit of detail. But essentially what we're doing, as I say, in the SAP license arena, we're putting agents out onto your system. We're looking at your current license usage. We're looking at that usage over a period of time. We're comparing that to the bill of materials from SAP, and we're looking at, are you optimizing the license situation you have at the moment? Are you getting the most from those licenses? Are you over licensed? Are you under licensed? Wherever it might be. But we'll help you to best optimize that license situation going forward. Similarly with data management and archiving, again, we're looking at the growth of the data within the SAP systems. We're looking at your current data management and archiving processes, and we're also looking at how we can best optimize those processes going forward. So again, are you planning to move to the cloud in the future? Are you staying on-prem? Because those things can have a quite significant impact on how you manage data and what you archive going into the future. Also, how's that linked back to like kind of regulation in your industry or those kind of things? We also look at SAP support and your SAP application strategy. So how is basis support running today? How is that interacting with your existing organization, with your functional provider? How does that fit with the current application strategy? Have you retired applications? Have you moved or changed applications? So is the support that you're running today fit for purpose for what you're doing at the moment? And again, with an eye on the strategy going forward, how does that support work into the future? Again, the underlying infrastructure critical to all of this. So, how is the infrastructure performing today? And again, what's into the future? So, are you staying on-prem? Have you made a big investment on on-premise infrastructure? Have you got your own basis support teams? Or are you looking to do something completely different? Are you looking to go out there to the cloud? And we can kind of look at how you optimize that infrastructure for the future strategy, wherever that strategy might be. All of that relates to SAP spend. As Graham touched on a few minutes ago, SAP is one of the most expensive things that organizations do from an IT perspective. So helping to kind of optimize and reduce the spend on SAP can be a critical part of the overall optimization report. Okay, so I'll hand back to David.
Great, many thanks indeed, John. So one of the 4 key areas where you can make a massive impact on your total cost of ownership of your SAP environment without any effect on BAU is to really understand your license usage within SAP. Your bill of materials from SAP is going to be one of the biggest bills you probably had in terms of a financial bill, as well as it being a bill of materials, but also your ongoing maintenance and support. And throughout your ownership lifecycle of SAP, you do get various points where you can renegotiate that license and you can make changes to it and you can make tweaks. Certainly if you're buying more software from SAP, it's a good point to look at the bits of software that you're not using, not making the most of at that point, to try and build that into any negotiations, to try and flex in and flex out bits of software. But also if you're moving to S/4HANA, then you do have an opportunity to do what's called a value exchange with SAP, where they look at your contract, what you've bought right now, and do a value exchange to S4, which has got a different set of licenses. So in ECC, where you've got professional and limited professional, in S4 you no longer have limited professional, you've got productivity and functional licenses. So it's important to make sure before you even do that value exchange to understand exactly what licenses you have now, how they're used, and most critical, to optimize those licenses. There's no point swapping out a few thousand professional ECC licenses for a few thousand professional S4 licenses when actually, half of the people with those licenses don't need a professional license. So this graphic that you can see in front of you it might be familiar to you because it's an SAP graphic, but it shows very clearly the only three methods that SAP license any of their software. There is no other method than these three areas in the purple and the green and the blue. The most familiar area to most people is going to be the direct human access licenses. So these are named user licenses. These are the ones where you've got the most ability to optimize them. And they're also one of those areas where it's quite easy to be non-compliant. And what happens is most companies are massively over licensed in this area. They tend to allocate professional licenses to people based on what they think they might do. And very rarely do they go back and actually analyze to see if those people are actually using the full capabilities of that license. And if they did, they might find that, you know, a few hundred or a few thousand, like we do, professional licenses can be booked back into the pot and be replaced with far less expensive licenses. And also, as I touched on before, if you move into S4, it's important to truly understand where you sit in terms of usage in this area, so that when you do a value exchange, you are getting maximum value when you move to S4. So as part of the review that we can do, we will look at every single account in your SAP system. We will understand what they do, how often they do it, and based on that, we can provide you with details of how you could potentially optimize that and see what you can get back from your bill of materials in that area. As in doing so, of course, we'll also be checking for compliance. Are you compliant in that area? The second area that SAP licensing is indirect or digital access. Now, this is a relatively new license. It's only been around really since April 2018, so only 3 years that you've been able to buy a digital access license. So this allows you to license third-party systems to connect into SAP and create or change documents in SAP. And one of the problem areas is that a lot of integration done in the past, a lot of companies using SAP didn't realize that you didn't just need an integration license like PI, you actually needed named user licenses, because before digital access came along, named user licenses were the only kind of license. So if you had a situation, for instance, where you had Salesforce integrated to your SAP core, and the users on the end of the Salesforce system were creating automatically sales documents in the digital core, they also needed an SAP license. There was no other way. Now there is. SAP do sell digital access licenses, which is based on number of documents created. There's about 10 different documents which they can count. They will also, there's a digital access adoption program which expires December 2021, so in a very short period of time, where if you have transgressed and you've got some exposure in digital access, SAP, if you did buy a digital access license before the end of 2021, will give you an amnesty essentially for any past misdemeanors in terms of indirect access. But as part of the review that we can do, we can also check that kind of activity. We will be able to identify suspect accounts that might be causing digital access to tell you if there's any compliance issues there. We can also potentially mitigate compliance issues by reallocating named user licenses to indirect license systems. And we can potentially give you an idea of what the true exposure is in that area. A third area we can look at down at the bottom, the application access licenses. So you'll all be familiar with these kind of licenses. So they tend to be SAP add-on systems or standalone systems. So these tend to be licensed by either a business metric or a technical metric. So a technical metric might be something like number of CPUs, amount of gigabytes being transferred. A business metric could be number of master user records, or your turnover or profit, or things like this. Generally speaking, these tend to be easier to monitor and understand where you stand in terms of compliance. In terms of optimization, there's not a huge amount that you can do in there unless you've bought hundreds of blocks of users for a certain system which you're not using, and you might be able to, in a negotiation, flex in or flex out these kind of things. But again, it's an area that we will look at during this review to see if there's any real quick wins that have reducing your costs in this area. Now, the one thing that's not on the SAP slide, which is quite critical to your cost, is actually if you're running the HANA database, is how you've licensed that database. There's essentially two ways you can license the HANA database. You can buy the enterprise full use license, allows you to use it even on non-SAP systems. So this is based on gigabyte pricing, and I think that's blocks of 64 gigabytes. Now, the interesting thing here, if you're buying blocks of 64 gigabytes, when we pass back to Graham and he's talking about archiving data, what kind of data you're having sat in your HANA full use license, if you don't need it there, then it's best for it to be archived off or put somewhere cheaper, because you're potentially spending hundreds of thousands of pounds on blocks of HANA data to store info data that you don't need. Likewise, if you've got the other kind of license, the runtime HANA SAP application value license, HSAV, if you're familiar with your bill of materials and you have that kind of license, then effectively what they do is all of the software that you buy from SAP, there will be a 15% charge for the HANA aspect of it. Now, if you're not using a big chunk of that software, it doesn't make much sense to me for you to be paying 15% on unused software on your against your HANA license. So again, we can look at all these different areas and truly understand where your licensing is right now from a compliance perspective and where it can be optimized. And in fact, if we could just go to that next slide, Rob. So in summary, the outcomes from this stage and what we'll give you is a clear view of your actual license utilization. We'll compare that with what you've purchased from SAP, your bill of materials. We'll be able to identify places where you're over licensed, under licensed, any suspected indirect license exposure, recommendations of how we can remediate any of those compliance issues without necessarily having to buy additional licenses or digital access, and also a profile of where we think that a sort of sub project, if you like, to actually do the optimization of what kind of returns you could expect. So in very quick summary, this is one of the 4 ways which we could seriously reduce your TCO of SAP without any impact on BAU. So this quick poll is basic question. Do you think that you would benefit from an examination of your SAP license usage statistics? So if you could select the most appropriate answer now, we'll give you a few seconds and
And there's the results there for you.
okay, about 1/3, yeah.
Good.
Very good.
Okay, over to me. So I'm going to talk a little bit about SAP data management and right-sizing and other aspects of what SAP, where we get involved with SAP customers. I'd like to go to the next slide. So how do we help our customers? So there's a number of situations the customers will go through, scenarios you'll hit, and there is a cause and effect, and based on that there's a potentially a tool within Proceed where we can help solve that issue. So moving to S/4HANA and Business Suite on HANA, obviously the smaller you are when you move, the most cost effective. So obviously that fits into our SAP Archiving, reducing the size of the system divestment of a subsidiary. We can use similar techniques within the archiving to remove the data. Complying with new regulation requirements, there's a whole raft of technology within SAP with ILM to enhance your system around general data protection requirements. Also, making sure you've got the data that you should only need in your system. A lot of organizations have too much data, which exposes a lot of risk. Moving to hyperscaler, again, reducing the size, reduces the costs. Implementing a digital transformation, like maybe a Vim, that's where you go into content management, vendor invoice management, or you're transforming your whole organization to another ERP. Again, we would be supporting you to decommission essentially your old SAP systems. Mergers and acquisitions, as we know, a lot of those are going on at the moment. You will acquire a number of solutions you may not want to continue to support. We can decommission those. And then finally, system performance issues, probably the vein of most organizations. The bigger the system, the slower the system gets. Obviously, implementing archiving, getting the system to the right size, the organization would obviously improve performance. Thank you. Can you move on to the next slide, please? Okay, so why archive? I suppose, archiving is the most efficient way to remove data from SAP. It's the only recommended way from SAP to delete data, but also making sure you still have access to it because it's moved to a different level of storage, it will be moved into the cloud. So therefore, it reduces the active partition or the hot store, as it were. So yeah, so improve performance, reduce cost, simplify migrations, and meet regulatory compliance as regards to only having the data that you should have. What have we done? So just give a couple of stats there. We've saved up to £1 million worth of savings. We're moving to we can save up to £1 million worth of savings. We're moving to a hyperscaler in infrastructure costs or migration costs, and so far, worldwide, we've saved up to 12,000 terabytes of data, moving towards 12,500 actually, to be exact, basically through archiving. Data's not gone. Important thing is the data does not go. It is moved into a different type of storage. Next slide, please. So, what is the reason for right sizing and therefore ongoing data management? This is an example of an organization that we were engaged with based on as you can see, their significant growth up to 2018. There was an estimate on that, but this is a graph. Actually, I'll probably change that now to be an actual. But as you can see, like any typical SAP system, they are growing exponentially. And the last 2 years, or the last 4 years, they'd acquired another organization and changed the way their organization worked. They were moving to S4 HANA on Business Suite. We right-sized them, and the right-sizing showed two things. One, if they don't reduce the size of their systems, there would be not a significant there'd be a significant impact moving to S4 HANA, i.e., or Business Suite on HANA, as in because of the compression going to the HANA database. But without data management, as you can see, they will continue to grow, and within a number of years, they'll be back to where they started again in a more expensive environment. So the graph at the bottom was where we would right-size them and we would manage their data. And the key to that is to ensure that we kept below this line as long as we could, around the 3 terabyte range, archiving their data and making sure their growth management kept within a scale around about the 2 to 3%. So moving on. So what do we do within the context of the analysis that we do? So we look at, from a high level perspective, we look at what data we can optimize broadly across the organization before we get deeper into the details. We touch on the usage of the system based on a couple of standard SAP transactions. We can then dive into that, and from that we can glean a lot of information. I'll give you a couple of examples when we've done that analysis. We can look at what can be purged, we can look at what can be deleted, we can look at what could be moved maybe to a different location. and have an immediate effect on your total cost of ownership. And this is presented to you as part of the audit, and we can walk through this in detail and provide you feedback on any specific questions you have. So how does the report look? If you go to the next slide, the information that we can get out of your system just from a high level provides us, total size of the database that you currently have, the total of the size of the database that can be archived. There can be a difference there because certain data we can't archive. And we then do some calculations based on the age of the system, based on how much data will be retained by best practice. And we can then get an idea as regards to what we would retain and what would be archived. Not an exact science. There's always changes within the organization and processes that may have an impact on that, but this is broadly taking best practice. We also look at SAP Office. It's a key area where people have difficulties of actually when they're certainly moving to S4 HANA or Business Suite on HANA, you don't want to use your expensive HANA as a where to store your documents, and we would suggest you'd always move that to a content store. So that's been identified just based on the table information that you can provide to us. Next slide, please. We can put this into a graphical representation as regards to where you can obviously see where your data is. This is quite typical of most organizations, and it's quite typical, unfortunately, that Basis has a big lump of that. The people of the organization who's managing and supporting your systems will always have the most important thing to them is to keep the systems up and running. They may not necessarily have time to look at housekeeping and opportunities where they can actually reduce the amount of Basis application data which has been created, i.e. logs, etc. Next slide, please. So what does it mean? What does it, could we provide an organization if we were to reduce them? This is an example. Moving to SAP HANA, we're looking at the analysis on one side if we did nothing. So you're taking a current database, say around 3 terabytes. Cost of the new appliances would probably be about 148k. Fine. You then have to multiply it, obviously, because that landscape is multiplied across a number of landscapes. So therefore, it's DR, pre-prod, QA test, etc. So you've got 4 systems that takes you up to 592k straight away. So we would then look at what we could do from a archiving perspective, right-sizing perspective, and any system will have data that can be removed. On average 10-year system, we can reduce it significantly. So we're saying in this situation, we would look at getting it down to at least 1 terabyte in the new HANA world, which is a significant reduction in cost. And based on the fact is that you've got those multiple systems, and the fact is that the replication goes across those systems, we would suggest in that situation at least a 344k saving, which is around 58% less than the original cost if you did nothing. So doing something, doing nothing. And in this situation, the actual archiving or the right sizing would be a significantly smaller amount of money than just doing nothing, as it were. So invest to save, as we always say. Next slide, please. So from this stage, the outcomes of this stage to zero impact, because obviously the data is moved into an archive and still available, so there isn't any impact to the business as usual. We would age your current system, look at what can be archived, look what can potentially be deleted. Where a customer owner has got 26 years worth of data, 16 years worth of data they don't even need. You can view the database size, and we can actually look at what can be archived, and we can agree what can be taken out of the system and put into the archive. We can look at the largest growth areas by functional area. Some areas will always have a bigger impact depending on your type of organization, and we can focus on those areas and manage those going forward, because we want to keep the growth down. View the database sizes and based on your current policies and what would happen if we adopted your policies. and look at the volume of the basis data. So housekeeping, quick wins, which will reduce the size of the database. And then we can review a cost savings sort of SLA impact over what the overall recommendations going forward. So from our perspective, it's not necessarily to do with what we do now, it's what we do in 2 years' time, in 5 years' time, to keep the management of your system under control. And therefore you don't have to worry about costs going forward. Okay, so I have a question now. How well aligned is your organization in managing data policies with best practice as described in the previous session, i.e., are you managing your data as you would think well, or completely, partially, or not at all? Partially. There we go. Yeah. I think that's a perfect response, actually. There's always room for improvement. Brilliant. Thank you. I'll now hand over to Rob, and he'll cover off infrastructure and application strategy. Thanks, Rob.
Graham, I shall jump straight into the infrastructure side. So, where do we start? Well, from the optimization work, we really take a look at where you are today, and also where you came from. So, obviously, back in implementation days, everything was great. You know, things were of the right size. SLAs were met, things were under control, budget was good, and the business was very much into looking after SAP and making sure it worked really well. As we roll forward, and as we all know, as we get into more recent times, things change. You know, budgets are not there to keep up with stuff, and you might have some of these problems that are showed in the second graphic at the bottom there. But it's really quite common for what I see. I see a significant amount of database growth to the point where SLAs are being missed for backup and recovery, and if you were to have to do a DR, whether that would be actually achievable anymore or not. Obviously, the server count can grow. You might have new project environments that you never used to have before. Lots of people have touched your SAP system over the years, but also, you know, people might have left. You know, people with really good knowledge inside your center of excellence or inside your team have gone, and the cost of looking after your SAP system has gone up. And that's really why this whole service came about from the three of our organizations, is to try and pull those out for you. So this is what we would typically do with an environment like that one. We immediately start leveraging the information that both David and Graham have pulled out of the system. So how much data do you have in there? Do you really need 11 years worth of data in your production system? Do you want to go forward like that? And the answer is obviously, ideally not. You want to be able to evolve and get all these things back to a happier place, and get these things a bit more under control, which means cost savings. So here's some of the things we look at. So we break down and document the current total cost of SAP today. So that will include support contracts, how much you're paying for things like code management, all effectively across the board. We'll calculate a cost per SAP user that you have. It's really an interesting figure to pull out for you. And quite surprising for a lot of organizations how much that is. Again, we calculate that data age, as Graham was talking about, but more importantly, look at a policy that works to get you back to your SLAs. We'll review some of the components in the functional and technical support contracts to make sure that looks right, whether you're overpaying for something, and also if the changes that we're going to be recommending influence those contracts in any way. We look at the worst performing ABAP code, especially because we're taking a lot of data out of the system. The batch schedule might not have been reviewed in a number of years. Often we see batch schedules with jobs that have been running since the time of implementation but no longer do anything anymore. So things like that will eat resources that can be better served elsewhere. We review the current hosting, infrastructure and maintenance costs, and also the licenses for those things, as well as the server count and the databases in use. So HANA doesn't have to be the answer for every SAP application, so it's worth inserting that into the mix and what that means to your total spend. I talked about the ABAP stuff there, and obviously David's feedback from the license audit really is really important as well, because of the profile of the users and how that might evolve over the next few years. Great. The last thing is making sure that we're monitoring the stuff properly, so that we get into a place where these things that have got out of control now can be effectively monitored and make sure that they don't start to drift again. So obviously every customer is unique when we do these things. Everyone's got the way way the system has evolved over the years. But typically these are the kind of outputs that would come out of that previous example. Obviously, by archiving your system, getting as much data out into the archive as you can. You don't want that expensive system running, carrying all that data around from years ago. And what that obviously gives you is the ability to choose some infrastructure that is of the right size, and with the proceed continuous archiving, stay in that infrastructure. That's a really important thing, as rather than it drift and you have to pay more and more each time your system grows. We look at the architecture, we get the server numbers under control, and obviously, there's so many directions that each of these optimizations can take us, but it's certainly usually the server sprawl over the years, and there's things we can do there. The main thing is to reduce the risk to your business and make sure that it really can perform to those SLAs, and you're not going to have any issues and have to wait, I don't know, 10 hours to return to business operation. And obviously they talked about the contracts there and how we would effectively just give our view of what they look like and whether they're in our eyes excessive, but more important, if we're recommending things that are going to come as part of this optimization, then maybe those things can be revisited for further optimization with your current providers. Good. And again, main thing, keep your monitoring there so you can actually keep a track of those markers. So the key points to realize architecture savings is obviously physical hardware. Everybody knows it can be really expensive. It may not be the answer for everybody, but like I said, everybody's different, and we still see a good use case for physical infrastructure. It really does depend on the other elements that we see and the drivers there. We look at how your business runs SAP, and that should really drive the decision on your hosting partner. So whether you choose to keep it on-prem, whether you look at a cloud or hyperscaler or a private cloud, all of those things will be identified in this report for you to make an informed decision. So obviously, SAP want to sell you more things, a lot more licenses. So some of the things we found from recent optimization reviews is, there's an opportunity to review your status with SAP, and by using some of the new offerings that they're coming out with to your advantage, and maybe use some of the data in this report to help that negotiation. If you're already on HANA, our optimization work, there's still find some significant savings. So there's plenty we could still do there. I know I keep harping on about it, but obviously I don't want you to forget your key business SLAs. They're the things that must be checked, met, and protected. And you could do that via adopting the things in the report. But our advice will always be to keep the architecture simple, and that'll help you keep the costs under control. So as we said, HANA doesn't have to be the default database, something a lot of people maybe don't know, but there are options there for some of your other applications. So that's something that will come up in the review. Data management will also help your performance, as we said. More importantly as well, your backup times, your restore times, really good benefits from this. A big one is who you choose to design your SAP architecture, because it's critical to keep your SAP costs at the values that you want them to be. If you ask 10 architects to design your system, you'll get slightly different answers. The key for us is to insert budgets and initial costs and run costs into the conversation and make sure it stays in the conversation as you design or go through your change. So ensure your project and run costs feature heavily in your design considerations and maintain control of how SLAs are recommended to be delivered. What I mean by that is there's loads of ways to do your to deliver some of your SLAs, loads of different technologies out there, but the choice isn't always the most technically fantastic. It might be the most cost effective. So use any critical events you've got coming up. If you've got a hardware refresh coming up, use those kind of events to adopt some of these recommendations. So use them as a lever, as a driver for change. And the outcomes on my stage from the infrastructure side is obviously I bring everything together from David, Graham, and myself, and package that up together into savings across the board. So across those three areas. Obviously, there's so many other areas we would touch on as part of our work because we're following a path, if you like, depending on what we find for each customer. We'll produce a financial summary for you and show where any overspend is happening and what can be optimized. We document everything and any interdependencies between the things that we are going to be recommending. And then we produce a plan to introduce these recommendations from all three of us and a running order. But really, these are all sorted by the most financially beneficial to you guys. Okay, time for another poll question.
There's 100% on costs of existing services and how to optimize.
Right, excellent. Excellent. So next slide, I don't know whether you want to finish up, John.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. So I guess really thanks to all the guys who presented. I think as you could see from each one of the presentations that we go through, the whole point of what we're talking about today is really to identify potential areas of savings across data licensing and infrastructure. We see these as critical components of the SAP systems and also areas where by providing some focus you can get, if you like, the biggest bang for your buck in terms of savings, and also making the systems more easy to manage in the future going forward. The optimized service is really there to identify some projects based on those findings. What we've agreed from all three parties, that if a project is commissioned and we are engaged to do one of those projects, then we'll actually return the fee for the optimization and analysis service. What we typically find in the ones that we've done in the past is projects that we identify very often have a much higher cost saving than the actual cost of the project. So, you know, we're not saying that every area will always identify a project and every area will always provide some savings, but generally by addressing the things that we address, you will find something in there that you can tackle, which will effectively provide you with a higher saving than your outlay for the project. And you know, from the report, it's often very clear once we've done the analysis and we've delved into the data, it generally becomes clear which area is you know, is best for any sort of investment made. I think we are good to close that off there. Thank you everybody for attending today. It's been a good session, and hopefully we'll get to speak in the future.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Great.
you.
Thank you very much, everyone. Take care.
Cheers.